last week I was just really, really late on this. So I did it on a Saturday morning, which I haven't actually done for quite some time because normally I'm like just super, super on time and I'm super organized. And I just got busy. So I felt really bad about it. And then every time I do these, and I do them normally in my office, it's like do the recording and then get the audio and then try and get it off the iPhone and then combine it all together in Premiere and then upload it and wait. It just seemed like a lot of work. And frankly, I'd like to just go and play with the kids and relax a bit this afternoon. So I decided to live stream it. Now, because I don't normally live stream the YouTube videos, I am actually kind of curious if it's working, but I'm seeing people come along, which is good. So we'll see. Otherwise, I'm just going to be talking for like the next half an hour or something, and it's going to be absolutely pointless. All right, good. I do see comments, which okay, it's not a substantial comment, but it's something. And I'm conscious of a little bit of wind noise too, so let me know if it's too noisy. Part of the reason I thought I'd come out and do this outside today is that we're also just starting to get some pretty big changes to our required isolation rules here in Australia. And the thing that's super, super exciting for me is that, thanks, Rob, I can see your messages too, mate. The thing that's super exciting for me is that in Queensland, which is the state that I'm in now, and just for context, if you're in America and you go, oh, yeah, we've got big states like Texas. Like Queensland is our second largest state. It's twice the size of Texas. So it's a big, big, big place. It's about 1.8 million square kilometres worth of land here. And as of midnight tonight, which is Friday night for us, we get a whole bunch of restrictions starting to lift. So those restrictions include we can now travel up to 50 kilometres from home for non-essential reasons. National parks and things are open again, so we can go out to the mountains and have a bushwalk, do stuff like that. You can do non-essential shopping, which is good because there's a whole bunch of stuff on my list of things I'd like to do there. And then the biggies in terms of, well, I'm here on boat as well, is that we can go back on the boat and the jet ski, and I'm going to go and look at the jet ski in a moment for something quasi-related. We can do that for leisure as of tomorrow. So in theory, at least, and this is a theory that we did adhere to quite strictly, in theory for about the last probably 5 or 6 weeks, you could only go out on a boat or a jet ski if you're fishing. And I was like, yeah, well, this is a wakeboarding boat, but I would put some fishing rods in the air. And then I went, oh, the sentiment of the message is to try and get people not going out for non-essential reasons. So let's all sort of do the right thing, which we did. And now that time has passed here in Queensland, which is great. Now, for folks sort of interested in how different it is in terms of the impact of COVID-19, I thought I'd read some stats. And part of the reason why I thought I'd share these, is that I've done things like some live streaming, just riding around near the beach recently. And even a couple of days ago, I had people commenting, talking about how irresponsible it was that people weren't wearing masks and that were actually people outdoors. And I sort of realized that very often those people were in very, very different parts of the world with very, very different levels of infection and community transmission and all the rest of it. So as of 1 hour ago, the numbers in Australia are, we've had a total of 6,766 cases, positive cases. Of course, these are only the known cases, but it's a positive test. In Australia, we have had 93 deaths, which is tragic, but it is 93 in a country of 25 million people for the entire period, which in the global context is exceptionally good. As of today, as of right now, we have 931 active cases in the entire country. Now, our little state here is about 20% of the population, so g'day Strathus. So we've got about 20% of the population here. So pro rata active cases at the moment here in my part of the world, on the Gold Coast for the Aussies, is probably about 100. Sorry, in Queensland for the entire state, it's probably about 180. So when you see people out there riding around on bikes, still keeping social distance, but perhaps not wearing masks and perhaps waiting 1.5 meters apart at a coffee shop or something, you got a state with 5 million people in it, and you've got them spread over 1.8 million square kilometres, and 180 of those people are currently known active. Now, so if I say active, people will pop up and they'll go, yes, but what about all the ones we don't know? So, well, we don't know about the ones we don't know. It's a very Rumsfeldian comment. So, and we should do the comments and things as well, since this is a little bit live one. Simon, Australia did surprisingly well, considering it feels like you had much. I missed the rest of it. I just saw something about New Zealand and then tuned out. But I think one of the reasons Australia did extremely well, if we just think about the geography, like we're a big bloody island in the middle of the Pacific, and we're a long, long way from everything. So in terms of border control, we have that going for us. Same with New Zealand. So New Zealand has done exceptionally well out of this. So we don't have situations like say in Europe or even the US, where you're sharing borders with other countries and you have people coming and going a lot more frequently. By virtue of being so far away, getting here is harder for everyone. And then when you're here, I forget what it is now, but I think the population density, average person per square kilometre in Australia is like 2 point something. Now, granted, most of the 25 million people in Australia are in a handful of cities, mostly dotted around the coastline, but even still, we've got a lot of distance. So that's what's happening here. We can so 8 per square kilometre. Well, we've been multiplying, but again, like it's kind of pointless as well because that number is artificially low because it's like here's a fun thing, like because you're all at home and you're bored, go to Google Maps, turn it onto satellite mode, and just like go into the middle of Australia, right? And it's just desert everywhere. So it's really only when you get to the fringes, and even then, predominantly the east coast fringes, where you actually have any population whatsoever. So the low population density is a little bit misleading, but certainly much lower than places like, I mean, I've been spending a lot of time in London and Oslo over the last year. Very, very fundamentally different population densities. So a little bit of intro stuff there. Now I am going to come back to COVID-19 because this is the one blog post I wrote today. I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about that. I thought I'd talk a little bit about some of the IoT and network related projects I've been doing this week, and then I'm going to like show you what I've been doing and the way I've had to sort of hack around the dependencies and the restrictions I've had. So one of the things I asked this week is I said I would really like to find a way of IoTing my garage doors. Now, these are doors that are they're sort of roller doors. One of them is sort of entirely external and leads into a place where someone could jump over the fence anyway. So if they did manage to open it, no biggie. Another one leads into a garage with locked doors into the house. So I'm not too stressed about the risk of IoTing them. And the value proposition is I've got these remotes, which are they're just terrible. Like they're little. I've got my iPod Air case here at the moment, AirPod Pro. Yeah, that's what they're sort of this size with clunky buttons, and it's a little bit hard to see where they are. And they always fall down in the center console and everything. And I really want to just be able to talk to the person on my watch and ask her to open the door for me. And in my naivety, I thought, this will be easy. Like there'll be plenty of people with this problem, and there'll be a company where you can go and buy a product and you plug it in, and it will be fine. Maybe it repeats the RF signal, and I'm conscious that yes, they are obviously security devices, so they have rolling codes and things like that. But there'll be a model or something. And the answer seems to be equally complex and simple. Let me clarify what I mean with this. The complex part of it is there basically aren't any good answers that don't involve working with bare wires or soldering stuff. So that kind of surprised me because I thought, there'll be some turnkey stuff. Now, having said that, the simple part of it is that you can literally just run a wire from one socket to another socket on the back of the unit that's mounted in the garage, and effectively close that circuit, and it opens the door or closes the door. So really, all you're looking for is something that can close a circuit. And I have had a bunch of suggestions. I'm pretty sure I know what I'm going to do now, and I'm going to build something which is only going to cost probably in the tens of dollars. So that's the good news. But then you basically go down the much more roll it yourself home automation. And there's a little bit of me which is kind of like, oh, that'll be fun. I'll do it with my son as well. He's old enough to learn how to solder some stuff, and I've got a bit of an idea how to do it. Not a lot, but a bit of an idea. So maybe that'll be a fun project. So that's how I suspect I'm going to solve the garage door situation. Actually, and another really good one really good use case I come up with, I want to integrate into HomeKit. Because of isolation, I've been ordering a lot of stuff rather than going to the shops. Incidentally, I've also learned that I've been returning a lot of stuff as well, because a bunch of stuff that I've ordered has turned out to be frankly pretty shit. I've ended up packaging it or reselling it. So this has not been an overly successful home ordering experience for me. But anyway, postman calls up and he says, look, I'm outside your place. I've got the boxes. what should I do with them? And I said, oh, if I had home kitted this stuff, I could have just pulled out my phone and gone like open external garage door, which basically then just leads into the garden. I can go, mate, go and drop them in the garden. And then when you go on, I'll push the button and I'll close the garage door again. And that would have been nice. So I think there's a good value proposition there. So still on network things, a lot of where my time has been going over the last week is trying to make Ubiquiti cameras work in my house. Now, I have a very, very long running Twitter thread showing how I've been doing the entire build of my networking stuff in my house using all the Ubiquiti bits. And I'm super, super happy with the access points, with the rack I put in, with the Unify Dream Machine, total mental blank from that, Dream Machine Pro, and the switch and all that sort of stuff. Amazing. And the cameras that they gave me, and they did give me this stuff as well, I've been very public about that. I went and bought all the cables and racks and things like that, which frankly was the most expensive bit, but here we are. So the bits that they gave me are fantastic. The problem I've got is that all the cameras require PoE. So none of them are Wi-Fi. So they have to be wired into something. Now, ideally, you would backhaul them straight into the switch, or through a port on the wall and patchboard and then into the switch. And then they'd get power from the switch. Power over Ethernet is PoE for those who are not familiar. And that would be fine. And then, of course, that's not just power, but it's data as well over Ethernet. So what happens when you can't do that? So what happens when you simply don't have an Ethernet jack where you need it? So, for example, I've done one in the garage, and the place I wanted to put the camera in the garage, there is no wired connection anywhere near it. So I've kind of gone, okay, well, how can I do this? The best possible scenario that I could come up with was I had another access point they gave me, and this is an access point that also had a secondary port. So primary port and a secondary port. So in an ideal world, what you'd do is you'd Ethernet from your switch into the primary port. If you then want to have another device hang off the secondary port, you can do that. Now, what you can do, it's not too windy, but what you can do is you can wirelessly uplink access points. So I'll turn around a bit. So if I had a PoE injector, so a PoE injector literally just has an Ethernet cable in one end, and it then plugs into mains power. And then it obviously downgrades the voltage and provides you just enough to actually power the device. So what I thought I'd do is I'd have this PoE injector into the primary port that would give the access point power. Great. I can now wirelessly uplink that. I can then go out of the secondary port to the camera, except the secondary port doesn't provide PoE. They do have newer access points that do provide PoE on the secondary port. And apparently they're going to send me over some of those, so I'll get to play with that. But for the moment, I don't have that. So I've had to go into another PoE injector, and then out of that PoE injector into the camera. So you now end up with this really weird sort of dance where you've got a wall socket with a power cable that goes into a PoE injector. That PoE injector goes into the primary port of the AP. In the AP, you then have the secondary port with an Ethernet cable that comes out into the LAN port of the secondary injector. That also takes power from the wall. And then that injector provides the PoE straight back into the camera. And now you have a loop of effectively data transmission from the camera back through the PoE injector that's plugged into, and then into the secondary port of the AP. And then you've just got two injectors that you need to plug into the wall, and then the AP wireless uplinks. Still with me? Right, exactly. So it is a bit of a mess, but what it meant is that I could put this in the garage, and I've now got connectivity. Yeah, so I've seen a comment here. Yeah, it was fun. I used another word for it as I was storming around the house, swearing at the thing, trying to figure out the best way to do this. Now, that was the easy one. Wait till you see the hard one. So this is where I'm actually going to go and jump off the boat and show you something. So the hard one was, what I really wanted to do is I wanted to have one in the boat shed. And before anyone says, oh, I appreciate this is like the most first world of problems, right? But what I wanted to do, so come down here, is get one in the back, just there. Because then if anyone tries to steal my jet ski, I can see them, probably having successfully stolen the jet ski, although it is locked to the floor as well, which helps. But here's the problem. And the problem is that just above this door
there's like 40 centimeters worth of reinforced concrete. So you cannot get any signal from in here up to the access points in the house unless this door is open, because there is something about the slots in this door that manages to like reflect the RF back to the house so it could uplink. And then every time I came out here and I closed the door, I'd have no more signal. And this is what was absolutely driving me nuts. And I started doing stuff like trying different kinds of access points. So they make a lot of different APs. I've got a lot of different types floating around. I'm rotating them all out. And then I thought what I'll do is somewhere on the jetty just here, I'll put another access point. The fishing rods are there. Don't worry, they're there. So on the jetty over here, I'll put another access point. And then what I could do is I could bounce from there to here to there, and it'd be fine. And I'm driving myself crazy trying to figure this out. And eventually, I'll show you what I've done. And I'm going to turn off my pool pump first, actually, because that's, there you go, a bit better. That was a bit loud. And incidentally, I'm on 4G now because I just don't trust that going between access points and all the concrete, it's actually going to stay stable. So here's what we have now. This is a UniFi Mesh HD unit. Now, I wrote a blog post about this years ago where I used this to actually get Wi-Fi down to the jetty when I just had the jet ski there. So what this mesh unit does is this is powered by PoE, and then the camera, which you can see sitting just above it, that's also powered by PoE. So the same sort of setup as in the garage. The big difference is the primary port of that unit is being powered by this guy just down here. So this is Ethernet over power. And now I can feel all the water running back out, so I've got to turn the pump back on. So what I've ended up doing is using an Ethernet over power unit, and someone who watched my video last week suggested this. So thank you so much for that, because I had just like completely forgotten that I actually had one of these units laying around from years and years and years ago. So that Ethernet over power unit literally sends Ethernet over your power lines, not a particularly high bit rate, but it's enough to drive those cameras in 1080p, which is fantastic. So then at the other end in the server cabinet, there's effectively the terminating end of that. So there is an Ethernet cable going into a unit which is plugged into power, and that manages to send Ethernet through the power lines, and that's how I fix it. This is literally multiple work days worth of effort gone in just to try and make these freaking cameras work. I have suggested to Ubiquiti with great enthusiasm that I would really like to see some Wi-Fi cameras from them. If there were Wi-Fi cameras, that would solve many of these problems. It would still need to be near power, and I've still got problems with other places I want to put cameras, so I've got an electrician coming back to run more Ethernet to other places. But at least it would solve the problem of being able to put it somewhere in the house where you've actually got power. All right. That was much less fun than it sounds. Trust me, even though it sounded painful. On to something else. Now, something I wrote about this week, and I want to spend a bit of time talking about this. I wrote about it very, very briefly, and I spent hours doing a panel on it the other night. And that is the COVID-safe tracing, contact tracing app that we have here in Australia. It launched on Sunday night. Now, I've spoken before. I don't know if you can hear it. There's an ice cream truck somewhere, like literally playing Greensleeves. The kids hear this and they go absolutely nuts. But anyway, so I've had long threads about my views of contact tracing in terms of here is what I'd like to see in terms of how we could ensure privacy and transparency, how it could minimize data collection, all this sort of stuff. So I was really sort of enthusiastic about the potential of this. So I was especially keen to pull the thing down, and I eventually installed it on Monday, and I wrote a tweet thread about it. And as I was writing the tweet thread, I was also watching other people around me starting to decompile the thing. So particularly pulling down the Android APKs, sucking all the code out and going, oh, okay, here's what it actually does. This is interesting. So I wrote a thread just sort of explaining the installation process. And for folks who haven't installed it, which is, I guess, anyone not in Australia, and the folks in Australia, a surprisingly large number, I'm going to get to that number in a moment. It's basically just says, what's your name? What's your age range? What's your postcode? So that's the first screen. The postcode obviously gives them some sense of where you are in the country. It never asks for your address. It doesn't even ask for your suburb, which you could possibly imply from the postcode. In Australia, we have postcodes which cover multiple suburbs,
And certainly here on the Gold Coast, at least tens of thousands of different people, possibly even hundreds of thousands in some places, or a six-figure number. So the postcode is a very low fidelity piece of geolocation data, but it does then obviously allow them to figure out who has been in neighbouring postcodes, and assuming that we're all not going too far beyond our own boundaries, well, you've got a good idea of who you could have possibly come into contact with. Next screen asks for a mobile number. Mobile number sends a one-time password. You enter that, job done. So you do have to register with the mobile number. They then have a way of contacting you, obviously. I suspect that that is also a bit of an anti-abuse mechanism, because you do have to actually receive that SMS in order to authenticate or in order to register. Now, one interesting thing that's been discovered with this, and keep in mind that, and I'm going to read some of these comments. Funny how people write out privacy with this app when they realize personal data of Facebook, Instagram, and others. I'll come back to that too, because that's a really interesting comment. One thing that we've got to keep in mind is that clearly, as far as IT projects go, this is a rushed one. Like there's no other way of explaining it. But there's really no other choice, is there? It's not like, oh yeah, let's just take our time to do all this to the normal degrees of due diligence we would because we don't have time pressure. It's like, well, actually, this thing's pretty serious. So clearly, things moved at a faster pace than what they would have otherwise. As a minimum viable product, and in the panel of discussion I'm going to talk about in a moment, that the term MVP came up many, many, many times. This is good. But there are glitches. So one of the glitches seems to be there's a bunch of people who try to register whilst connected to Wi-Fi and they can't. They turn off the Wi-Fi, they drop back to 4G, and they can. Our assumption from this is that there is something around geo-blocking of IP addresses that are deemed to be either outside Australia or potentially demonstrating abuse. So that's obviously going to be a problematic situation if people can't register via Wi-Fi, because there wasn't an intuitive message. I had one of my friends contact me, and she said she and her husband couldn't register. They just never get the PIN, so they basically never get the SMS, and that is a real problem. So she turned off Wi-Fi. All good. For the most part, that's an easy fix. But as some people said, look, the nature of Australia, there are a bunch of people who are out in the absolute middle of nowhere. They have no 4G, like their internet is their Wi-Fi. So if they can't connect over Wi-Fi, well, they just can't register. But this is how multifaceted the whole thing is, because then you go, well, if you're out in the middle of nowhere, how many people are you actually going to be coming into contact with? It's like you're going to see cows, right? Like cows and your own family who you sleep with anyway. So, how big an issue is it? And then just to go and make things worse, the government sort of said, oh, it's fine. Like just the next time you go into town, you register, which yes, is true, but it's also not particularly sympathetic. So the messaging has been really struggling as well. So it's been a little bit glitchy in some areas like that. But look, once it's installed, nothing more really happens. It's like it's installed and there's one button which you can go and press in order to say, I have tested positive, and then it will upload your data. And this is one of the super, super important bits. It only uploads your contact tracing data. You can do test positive. Now, when I would have said that a week ago, people would have said, that's what they tell you, but are they going to open source the app? Because you can't believe that the government's actually going to do that. Now, the government has not yet open sourced the app, and I think that is a problem in terms of transparency, because they should. They should go, look, yeah, we're happy for everyone to look at it. Here you go. But the transparency thing is more of an image problem than anything else. And the reason for that is that in the thread, I linked through to a couple of guys who I then joined the panel with later on. So one of them is Jeff Huntley. I've known Jeff for years. He's another Microsoft MVP. And another one of the guys is Matthew Robbins, another Microsoft MVP as well. And they pulled it apart and they looked at it and they went, yeah, it like literally does what it says on the box. So I would like open source for transparency, but we don't need open source to actually understand what it does. And as many people said when I first started saying we need open source, they said, the government, they could open source it and then they could ship a different one to your phone. Sneaky, sneaky government. Well, if they did that, we'd see it. And what we're going to be really, really interested in now is what happens in the next release and the release after that. Because I am super, super curious to see the deltas between version 1 and 1 point whatever comes next. So for everyone who's still sort of on the side of, well, the government is going to try and screw us somehow in the code, we will have complete transparency into that, and there will be accountability. And as someone just said in the message I saw pop up, they didn't make any attempts to obfuscate the code either. So from a transparency perspective, that's good. They need to sort that open source thing out, but we are still, like, we're 5 days into this. I can imagine that there's a bunch of lawyers somewhere sitting around trying to figure out how to, first of all, what is this open source thing? Why should we do it? What is the value? How do we cover our asses? I imagine, man, every time there's lawyers involved, it just becomes an absolute nightmare. So there's probably a bit of that going on. Now, there are a whole bunch of things which are also just frankly not clear enough, and the messaging isn't good. So, for example, there is a lot of discussion about, does the app need to be in the foreground on an unlocked phone to work? So, do you need to have your phone unlocked and the COVID safe app like literally sitting there facing you? Because what we're seeing is we're seeing some messaging which said that, and then the government sort of walked it back because obviously, like, this is going to be most valuable when you're out and about. So let's say, as our restrictions start lifting, you end up in a coffee shop somewhere. Do you want to leave your unlocked phone on the table? Because that's the environment where this is going to be the most valuable. Maybe the bloke on the next table is positive and he's sneezed a couple of times or something like that. But I also don't want someone to pick my phone up and walk away with it unlocked, because that would be counter to all the other good security advice about how we protect our personal devices. So Gov needs to do way, 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 way better at communicating that. This is also, here's another interesting way of looking at it. What if this is a good MVP, a good, so the minimum viable product context, not the Microsoft most valuable professional context? But more than that, this is now a footprint of the app on the device, which can be updated. Because if you're on, say, an iPhone, every single update they make is going to be automatically pushed out. So even if the app is not fantastic at the moment, but it is sufficient, at least now there's a way of actually rolling to newer versions very easily with the maximum possible audience as it gets better and better. Now, there's another part as well, which is around the efficacy of tracing contacts in this fashion. And what I mean by this is, how much use is it? So let's take that coffee shop situation, and you're sitting at a table, someone else is positive. Is this actually useful later on? Is it going to be useful to know that you've been there with that other person? I'm not a health professional. Massive caveat there. Not a health professional at all. I did work in a healthcare company for 14 years, but different story. I would imagine that it would make sense insofar as it would give you a good idea of who you've been around, and that would then give you a good idea of if you needed to go and possibly get a test. And incidentally, we are doing a shitload of tests in Australia at the moment, and again, I'm not a professional in this area, but everything I read in terms of the news and hearing from other people who genuinely need to get tests do seem to be getting them. I know that's not the same in other parts of the world. Don't get angry at me for that. So that seems useful, but I'd really like to see it demonstrated as well. And it's not that I want other people to go out there and get coronavirus, but I would be really, really interested, in the name of transparency, to see what difference did it make when people do test positive and they're running the app. Can we quantify this some sort of way? Because if the government wants to get more confidence and trustworthiness in what they're doing, they need to demonstrate stuff like this. So we'll see. Time will tell on that front. A couple of other comments that were made earlier on. So someone mentioned AWS. So the Australian government, it seems like they had a very short, very limited tender process, and you would expect that it would be very short, for the cloud hosting of the service. It went to AWS. They are the world's largest cloud hosting provider. Obviously, I would have loved to have seen it go into Microsoft, but Amazon is a very, very good platform. I don't have any problems with it going to Amazon. A bunch of people here got quite upset when they said, they got upset in a lot of stuff. I'm going to show you how weird and how upset people got in just a moment. But anyway, a bunch of people here got upset because they said the local Aussies didn't get a look in, the local Aussie cloud providers. And I got to be honest, I really had to sit there and scratch my head to think about who the local ones are, because you just don't hear about them. And I saw some names mentioned in a news article, and I'm like, I don't know them, I don't know them, I don't know them. What would I feel more comfortable with? Like the local Aussie one I don't know, or the world's largest cloud provider, or one of the world's largest cloud providers? So I think that kind of makes sense. I keep hearing people say,
But what's going to happen is you got the USA Cloud Act, and the Cloud Act means that an American court can order that, if necessary, an American cloud provider has to hand over data that's collected and stored in another country. Then you're screwed. Now, I think there's a couple of issues there. Number one, can you imagine what would happen in a situation where a US court was ordering a company like Amazon to hand over data, not just based in another country, but belonging to the government of another country? I think that would be a really, really interesting debate that goes on there. The other thing as well is, and this was a massive theme that came through when I was on this panel the other day. At least it was a theme from my bits of the talk. Is let us not ask what this thing is like in isolation, but rather how it sits and how it changes things in the broader scheme of the pandemic. Now, I'll give you an example of what I mean by this. If you don't run the app and you test positive, you will go into a database somewhere. Where is that database stored? Now, someone, don't quote me on this, but someone told me it's on AWS. So you can see where I'm going with this, right? It's like, should we be upset about the selection of AWS if stuff is already in AWS without the app anyway, because it really doesn't change anything? Now, there might be a discussion about, in general, is it a good idea for the longer term when we have the time to plan these things out, we're not under duress, for stuff to be in AWS, or should it be in a local cloud provider and well and truly outside the reach of, say, law enforcement departments in the world? Maybe that's a reasonable discussion, but it's not something to beat up on the app about. Now, there's a comment there also about people getting upset about privacy and expressing that over social media. And there is a certain irony there, but there are also two ways of looking at this. So, the most obvious way of looking at it is to say, if you are so concerned about your privacy, why are you on social media, like on Facebook, which is one of the most privacy invasive services in the world, expressing your displeasure at it? That doesn't really seem to be a consistent strategy on your own privacy footprint. So there is definitely irony there. If I remember, I'll link you to a video from, apparently he's a comedian and a lawyer here in Australia, but he did this little piece on pretending to be outraged about the COVID-19 tracing app, and then expressing all of this outrage on all these social media platforms, just leaking personal data everywhere. I'll link to that if I can find it. So there's that. Now, so there's two ways of looking at it. So one way is you're basically already exposing a huge amount of info anyway. The other way, though, is it should still be your choice, right, about how much personal info you want to share. I was Ronnie Cheng. Was it Ronnie Cheng? I don't know. Can't remember. Anyway, I'll find the link later on too. Because I just remember the guy in a short haircut and I think a dark blue shirt in a very boring backdrop too. Like I feel he could have put more into the backdrop. Anyway, so the other part of this was around uh, just because you have made some compromises in privacy in one area doesn't mean that you should automatically make them in another. And I do think that people should have that ability to choose. And of course, you do have the ability to choose with this app. You don't have to install it. But, and just to sort of start wrapping up that piece in the interest of time, the unanimous consensus of the panel was that they'd done a good job with the app. The government had done a good job with the app. It was a good minimum viable product, and everyone there either had installed it or would be installing it very soon. Now, time will tell about those other points, open sourcing, the efficacy of it, all the rest of it, but I think we've actually done a pretty good start here. And yeah, I appreciate my backdrop was really nice, and I wasn't I wasn't sort of trying to berate the guy who did the fun comedy skit by his background. And I was almost going to say, why don't you just go down and sit by the water or something? But I get in trouble if I say that because people say I'm privileged. Anyway, moving on. Right, so there's a theme here which is a little bit more serious, because it's just, put it this way, I have muted more people in the last week than I did in probably the last 2 years before that. I've been saying the last year, but I've had another day to think about it now. People are getting really, really angry about this. And I saw a comment from Mike Cannon-Brookes, and he's the co-founder of Atlassian, fellow Aussie, made $1 billion out of it. Good on him, he was a smart bloke. He made a comment saying, in fact, it was a comment on Hacker News, where he said, people need to turn the angry mob mode off. And this is often what it feels like. It feels like angry mob mode. And it's such a predictable behavior each time. It's such a predictable demographic that expresses this. It's very, very frequently an avatar on Twitter that is non-identifiable, very often a name which doesn't match to a real identity, very often someone who would never, ever, ever, in fact, I would pretty safely say it's always someone who would never come up to you and speak to you like this in person. I think one of the worst ones I've had here, and I'm not going to provide too much detail on this because I don't particularly want to go through and continue this thread, but just to give you some context about how frankly fucking weird it gets. Somewhere in here, someone's gotten very upset where somehow we've turned a discussion about a tracing app designed to try and figure out who's come into contact with the deadly virus. That said something along the lines here is, long as we agree that this will result in added deaths and suicides due to technically incapable abusers and stalkers, and that suffering and death is acceptable. It's like, what? There is actually an interesting discussion to be had about the potential impact in cases of domestic violence. Now, I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole now, not because I don't want to talk about the topic, but because I've got about 4 minutes before I need to finish this and then go and buy dry ice for the kids. Another story. But obviously, there are some topics that some people hold very, very passionately dear, and this person became so belligerent and so aggressive. How crazy did this get? You think spouses and significant others trying to escape tech-capable abusers during COVID-19 won't be tracking via things like this? The level of sophistication required for a spouse to track another spouse using an app like this, effectively using Bluetooth beaconing and potentially just going and reverse engineering the app and emulating the app and then creating their own beaconing technology to try and track where the person goes. There's a lot of work required. This is like an absolutely non-trivial thing. Not to say it won't happen, not to say domestic violence isn't important and significant, it is, but this just got totally out of control. And even when I said, look, there's a whole bunch of people that have reviewed it, this person's like, you've personally tested the app with a common Android environment, and you know that no other app can interfere with it or could. And it's gotten to the point, how bad did it get? They said I'm a bit fucking weird. This is from like a black and white fake avatar with a strange name, but I guess it's all relative. It's just, it's so aggressive. Someone actually contacted me later on and said, look, they've had interactions with this account and it appears to be a sock puppet account for something else that's probably not what it's represented to be. So anyway, that was all just super, super, super weird. And there was just this constant theme of people getting not just passionate about a topic, I'm passionate about topics as well, but just angry. And it's exactly what Mike Cannon-Brookes was saying. It's like the angry mob mode. And for all of the discussion about we're all in this together, let's all try and fix the thing together, when I see that, it just absolutely grinds my gears to sort of see the aggression directed at someone like me who's part of a group of people trying to get transparency about the whole thing. So anyway, that's COVID Trace. I think we're just going to what was it? COVID safe, COVID Trace, the tracing app. Let's see how that works out over time. All right, last thing, because I'm conscious of time. Sponsored this week is Varonis. Varonis is back sponsoring me again. They've got their security FWD series up there, and they're talking about how far can Wi-Fi travel. So please go and check out Varonis. I appreciate them helping me do what I do and allowing me to still do what I do in a time where it's become very difficult for many others around us to actually continue their lifestyle as normal. So speaking of lifestyle as normal, I'm going to go and get a great big esky full of dry ice. If you don't know what an esky is because you're not from Australia, Google it. And then we're just going to go and make smoke on a whole bunch of stuff. And usually we end up with a lot of it going in the swimming pool and the whole thing just goes Harry Potter. A question here is, where can we catch the panel? Is it online? Yes, it is online. Look at my last blog post. I will also link to it. Thanks for the Pluralsight free month. Glad you enjoyed that. The Pluralsight free month is over now as well. So I hope everyone got some good value out of that. All right, folks, thanks for watching. If this format works well, I might even do it more in the future because it is a hell of a lot easier than manually recording, editing, rendering, uploading, etc., etc. So cheers for watching, everyone. Bye-bye.